Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our interview advice webinar with Reed CEO and Chairman James Reed. I'm Amy Davis, the head of content marketing at Reed. Before I introduce you to the man himself, I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about him for those of you that don't know. James has worked in recruitment and careers for more than 25 years. Reed has actually been around since the 1960s. James's knowledge of recruitment goes unchallenged, and you may have seen him on the news as a go-to commentator on recruitment and the labour market. He's passionate about improving lives through work, and as part of this, he has authored a number of best-selling books, including the one we're going to be talking around today, which is Why You, 101 Interview Questions You'll Never Fear Again. Today, James is going to give you some top tips from the book, and you can put any burning questions that you might have on the topic of interviewing or being interviewed to him. We've got a number of pre-submitted questions that lots of you have submitted as you've registered for the webinar, so we'll go through as many of those as we can. And also, please do not hesitate if you have questions as we go along to put them in our Q&A function that you'll find on the top right-hand side of your screen. James is going to talk around the subject for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll address your questions in the time that we have left at the end of the webinar. So without any further ado, may I introduce James Reed. Good afternoon, James, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Amy. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me on this webinar. And I thought it would be appropriate to begin a conversation about interviews with a question. And my question to you, for you to reflect on just for a moment, is when did you last have a life-changing conversation? When did you last have a life-changing conversation? Because the chances are, if you're applying for jobs or about to go for an interview, you're about to have one. So I ask that question and pose it at the beginning of the webinar to stress the importance of preparing for that conversation. And the book, Why You, I hope is a fantastic tool to help you do that, because it was a book that it's got my name on it, but actually we wrote it here at Reed. It was a crowdsourced team effort. It was first written in 2014, and it has become a well-established bestseller, and we've done several new editions. And the reason it's a successful book for people preparing for interviews is a simple one. The original idea was to crowdsource questions from our employer clients. So people out there who are recruiting people all the time. And we asked them a simple question. We asked them, what is your favorite interview question? And we got hundreds and hundreds of questions back. And we put the most common and the most interesting in this book. And those are the 101 questions referred to, with an additional 10 in the latest edition. We put those questions in the book because they're the most likely questions you're going to be asked, and they're highly timely and relevant because real interviewers are asking them right now. The next thing we did was workshop those questions. So I asked experienced recruiters from across our business. I invited them to workshops, and we discussed each question in turn, with looking at a couple of things in particular. What's the real question here? What are they really driving at when they ask this question? And what should your top line tactic, if you like, be to answer it? And that's how the book's set out. Each of these questions, we look at what's the underlying question and what's the top line tactic to answer it. So I hope it's a helpful guide, and I hope that it's easy and accessible to read. Why did we write the book in the first place? Well, here at Reed, we have literally thousands of people working in recruitment day in, day out. And I wanted to collect their best thinking, all that experience, all that knowledge into one single place to make it available to people, to help people make those crucial conversations a success. And it was very apparent to me that a lot of people worried about interviews. They were fearful of them or felt nervous beforehand. And then many felt that they had somehow sort of let themselves down afterwards, which isn't a good way of going about it. And there's a very simple adage which I've used often in this context. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So we've packed everything, I hope, that will really equip you to do well in an interview. And this book has been selling, as I said, for 8 years now, and there are literally almost 1,000 reviews on Amazon. And the most sort of rewarding review that I've read was just a very simple one. It was 5 stars and just three-letter words, and those 3 words were "got the job." That made me very happy, because that's why I wrote YU, to help people get the job that they really wanted. Because we only have one go at life, and to make the most of those opportunities that present themselves is just so important. And the book actually begins with a quote from the movie Wall Street. It's a classic movie, and the quote from the film just says, "Life all comes down to a few moments, and this is one of them." So this book is for you, and it's for your moments. So how's it laid out? What's it all about? Well, we corralled those interview questions into 6 categories, all beginning with C. And those are these: the classic questions, the career goal questions, character questions, competency questions, curveball questions, and creativity questions. And I'll say a little bit about each of these as we proceed through the slides. But the important point to stress here is, often when you're preparing for an interview, you don't have long to prepare. And as we sort of organize these questions and put them into these categories, it became very apparent to me that probably you could actually prepare yourself pretty well for an interview with just 15 questions in mind. And I call these the fateful 15, because really, looking at the 101 we collected, most interviews come down to these 15 questions. And if you haven't got long and you haven't got the time necessary to go through the whole book, my advice would be to read the introduction and then do prepare these classic interview questions, which are called the fateful 15. And my view is pretty much all the other questions in the book are sort of variants of the fateful 15. So if you've got good answers to these 15 questions, you'll be 80% of the way there in terms of your preparation. So this is the place to start. Here are some of the questions. The question that came up most often when we asked all those employers, what's your favorite interview question, is tell me about yourself. And that is the first question in the book. And that's a question, people want to know, who do you really think you are? And when you answer the question, do you know what to leave in and what to leave out? This is a question you should rehearse and prepare beforehand, and you should nail in the interview. It's an easy question if you've done your homework. No one knows more about yourself than you do, but you need to think about it to be clear about what you leave in and what you leave out. Some of these questions are sort of almost boringly obvious, aren't they? What are your greatest weaknesses? I mean, that gets asked so many times. And it reminds me of a joke. A guy went into an interview and he was asked, what's your greatest weakness? And he said, honesty. And the interviewer says, no, I can't accept honesty. I don't think you can have honesty as an answer to this question. And the applicant looks straight back at him and says, I don't give an F what you think. So there's truth in a joke, isn't there? Honesty, not a weakness in my view. It's a great strength. But you could be asked this question, and don't say something foolish like chocolate, because that will annoy your interviewer. If I was asked that question, I would say impatience, because I am an impatient person. Sometimes that can be a strength because I like to get things done and keep things moving. But sometimes it can be a weakness, can't it? Because, as they say, only fools rush in. So those are some examples of the classic interview questions. Career goal questions. This is the sort of area around how ambitious are you, where are you headed, but really importantly, in the context of a job interview, why do you want this job here right now? So this is a careful balancing act. You don't want to appear so ambitious that you're not interested in the job you've applied for, but you do want to look like you're keen to do well and progress. Here are some examples. What motivates you? What's your dream job? And how does this job fit your career plan? I mean, one question that I liked here was, can you describe the job you've applied for? And I think that's a very important question, because an interview is a conversation, and it's important that this job is right for you every bit as much as it's important that you're right for the job. So knowing about the job you've applied for, researching it thoroughly and being able to describe it is an important part of your application. What is motivating you to apply to this company to do this job at this time? And you should be able to answer that. I would avoid saying things like, when asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, sitting in your seat or in your shoes. Those are sort of rather predictable and in some cases threatening answers to the interviewer. So I would urge you to avoid that and think more about what your contribution can be rather than what your job title may be. Character questions. This is the sort of core of the book in many ways, because when you apply for a job and you're having a conversation with an interviewer, people are really trying to find out, who are you? What sort of person are you? What's your personality? What's your character? And I love this quote, character is destiny. I don't know if any of you have watched that wonderful series where the character Uhtred on television says, destiny is all. This is better than that. Character is destiny. And in these conversations, people will be interested in finding out who you really are. And they'll ask you questions like these. Now, this question, where does your boss think you are right now, used to be a particularly mean question. Now, so many of us are working remotely and working at home, it's perhaps less difficult to answer, because you might be working in your own bedroom, study, or place of residence. But what that question is probing is, are you a person of integrity? That's why the interviewer is asking you this question, because I've known in the past that plenty of people will say they're off doing something for our business and they're actually interviewing for another firm, or people have come to see us and on their company's time and they're interviewing for us. That is not good, because that's not what you should be doing when you're in company time. And so you don't want to fall into that trap. So either do your interviews out of working hours or take some time off to give them your proper attention. But the most important thing, I want to stress this, that people look for when they're asking questions around character is honesty and integrity. When we survey employers, that's the most important thing they seek for to find out about in applicants. And another area of important questioning is competency questions. And these questions are particularly common, I would say, in public sector type roles, where often the interviewer is working to a standard format and will ask every applicant the same questions. And competency questions are highly valued by employers in that space. And they're typically beginning, tell me about a time that you did something. And it's important that you have these examples prepared and in mind so that you can talk through what happened, what you did, and what the outcome was. And there's quite a lot of good advice in the book about how to approach these questions. So you need to have some examples from your own career and own work if you're going to be asked competency questions that you can use. I'd urge you to do that and prepare that. The curveball and creativity questions here are bundled together. And pitching is the art of instilling fear is a quote I quite like from the LA Dodgers. Why would an interviewer want to instill fear in an interviewee? Well, I don't really think they do. But what they want to try and do is put you off balance and see how you respond. Because in life and in work, lots of things happen that we didn't foresee, didn't expect, and they want to see how do you respond, when something's thrown at you, literally, that is surprising, off the wall, or difficult. And here are some examples of the questions that came up when we asked our employers what they like to ask. Now, this question, the first one, every CV has a lie in it, what's yours, is pretty aggressive, isn't it? But interestingly, here at Reed, we run a screening business where we have over 100 people whose sole job it is to check CVs, qualifications, and references for applicants for our clients. And you know what? 40% of the CVs we check have what we would call a falsehood in them. Make sure yours isn't one of them. So falsehoods could be two types of falsehood, really. I would say an honest mistake, or a malicious falsehood, which is a lie. And it's actually against the law to present yourself as a person of certain qualifications when you don't have them, or you're not equipped to do the work that you're applying for. So it's really, really important, given what I was just saying about the importance of integrity and trust in the workplace, that your CV is true to you and has no lies in it. So you'll be asked a lot of curveball questions. I like the one, what would you guess is the most searched for phrase on YouTube? We have a Korean edition of Why You, and this question was actually, they asked for us to remove it as it wasn't deemed culturally appropriate for Korea. I'm not sure why. It might be because there might be perceived to be some innuendo behind the question, but the answer to the question is very interesting. And the answer is how to. How to bake a cake, how to fix a carburetor. And the most searched for phrase on YouTube is actually how to. Why would it be anything else? So in more recent editions, we've added a section to the book on the future of work. And indeed, the next edition, it's going to be called The New World of Work, because there's been so much change, hasn't there, over the last couple of years, in how we work and what's expected of us at work. And this is all around how you deal with change. And I think it's so important that, change can be uncomfortable, can't it? Change can be difficult, but that we accept that we have to be, I say in Reed, and I seek a culture in Reed that is agile and responsive, so that the more agile and responsive we can be, the more appealing we will be to employers and organizations in the future, because every business leader knows that their organization is going to do one thing for sure, and that's change. So how are you able to demonstrate that you are agile and responsive? Or if you feel you're not agile and responsive enough, how might you learn to become more agile and responsive? Because those are characteristics that I believe will serve you well. So these are the type of questions that have been included in the final section around the future of work. This question, explain what a TV is to a person from the 1400s. Sounds totally absurd, doesn't it? And in some ways it is. But I was literally in a situation quite a little while ago now, where I was basically asking someone to describe something to me that when I didn't know what it was. And they were able to do that. That was a colleague, in a very helpful way, which changed the course of our business. What was the conversation? A colleague back in 1995, so a lifetime ago, came into my office and he said, I've got an idea. And I'm always interested in hearing people when they say I've got an idea, because I want to know what the idea is. And I said, yeah, Sean, what's your idea? And he said, James, I think we should have a website. This is back in 1995. Do you know what my answer was? What's that? So think about describing a website to someone who doesn't know what it is, which is very similar, isn't it, to describing a television to someone from the 1400s. And in a world that's rapidly changing, we're all going to be in situations where we have some knowledge that we need to engage other people about and describe to them in the workplace. So that is actually quite an interesting question. And the last question I'm going to pick up here is, how lucky are you and why? There's a lot of luck involved in life, isn't there? For sure. But it is possible to be more lucky by the way we approach things. And in the book, there's a very interesting example where they take an exercise where a group of people, some of whom describe themselves as lucky and some of whom say they're not particularly lucky, have to do the same thing. They have to pick up a book and count the number of pictures in it. And the ones that do it quickest win. The interesting thing about this exercise was that the people who described themselves as lucky, in general, finished the exercise a lot faster than the people who thought they were unlucky. And do you know why? Because on page 3 of the book, and though it's full of pictures, on page 3 of the book, it said there are 42 pictures in this book, you need not count them. And it was the lucky people, curiously, who noticed it. So there's a lot involved in being curious and observant if you want to be lucky. And I left that question in the new edition of the book near the end because I just think that single observation is so interesting. So when it's your turn, parting shots, how should you finish up the interview? Because like any conversation, it's the beginning and the end that we remember the most. And that will be true of your interviewer. So how do you want to finish? And I think there's some really important information in the book about what questions you might ask at the end. And I like a particular question, and I would urge people going for interviews to ask it, is there anything you're not certain about my application? Or is there anything I've told you that concerns you? Or is there anything I could provide you that would be helpful in this process? Because what you're trying to do here at the end of the conversation is surface any doubts that the interviewer might have to give you the opportunity to address them. You don't know what's going on in their head. So try and ask some questions that might surface any doubts or indeed misunderstandings that might have come up in the previous 45 minutes or an hour. That's a really good place to start. And then you might ask questions of them because you want to find out, it's an opportunity for you to find out more about what it's like to work in this company. So a good question of your interviewer is, what do you most like about working here? Because you want to be sure if you're going to accept this job offer that it's a place that's going to be great for you. So those sort of questions are interesting. And then at the end, you might ask procedural questions around, is there anything else I might send you, or how long might this process take to reach its conclusion? Do not, my advice is very firmly, ask about money. Jobs should be advertised with the salary range. And if you weren't happy with the salary that's been advertised, you shouldn't be sitting in the interview room in the first place. If you were happy about the salary, broadly in terms of its range, this is not the time to ask about money. And if you have a recruitment consultant, they're a good person to get, perhaps, if you feel you want to get more out of this opportunity than perhaps has been initially offered, to negotiate on your behalf. But do not mention money at the end of the interview. So it's now your turn to ask me some questions, which I'm looking forward to. And we've got on the next slide here, if you want to get the book, you can get it straight away by picturing that QR code on the screen. But I hope that gives you a flavour, an overview. Obviously, there's massive more information in the book. When it was first published, I put 3 copies of the book in our reception in our Victoria office because I wanted people coming in for interviews to have a look at it. And I asked the receptionist, let me know what the feedback is. And I came back from my holiday 2 weeks later, and I said, so how's the book going? And she said, they've all been nicked, which I thought was a good sign. So I hope this book will help you, and I hope this little webinar has been helpful too. Over to you for questions.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, James. That was really informative. So we've got loads of questions. We've got some that have come through already and some that have come through live. So we're going to go through the live ones now. Victoria's asked, you've said about salary just there, James, but she's actually asked, talking about salary always feels so uncomfortable. Specifically, though, if an employer asks how much you're currently on, which I know quite a lot of them do during an interview, she's asking, does she have to answer this? She's currently on a very low salary and she's looking to increase her expectations by about £10,000. So if she says her current low salary, is she opening herself up to the risk of them offering a lower amount than her desired salary? So I know you said not to talk about salary, but I guess if they ask you about salary.
No, that's a really good question, Victoria. If they're asking you a direct question, then of course salary's on the table. I mean, if the job has been advertised at a certain salary, as it should have been, then you're quite within your rights to say, you know, I'm applying for this job because it's broadly got the salary that I'm looking for next at this stage in my career. You might say my current job doesn't provide that, which is why I'm sitting here now. It's unlikely, I think, that they'll then push you to, they might say, well, what are you earning now? And I would make the same point I've made several times already. Do not lie, be honest and tell them. And you know, they might come back and say, well, we're going to offer you less. And you say, well, you're not acting within good faith, because the job was advertised at this rate, which is why I've applied. If you think I'm capable of doing the job and I'm a good candidate, that's the basis on which I'll take it forward. Otherwise, you know, from your point of view, it's goodbye, isn't it? No way. So I think, you know, that it's always important in a negotiation to be able to walk away. And as long as you feel that in that conversation and you mean it, you know, you should, I think, be okay.
Fabulous.
Just an aside on that at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of news about pay, isn't there, at the moment, because of the high inflation that we're living through, and salaries are going up, and you know, a lot of employers are now paying a premium to get people to move. So we've seen at Reed, we've seen people putting jobs on our website for 30, 40, 50% more than would have been the going rate not that long ago, because employers who are looking for particular skills know that there are people out there who have those skills, many of whom are probably working flexibly now from home and enjoy where they are. So the only way they can get those people to shift is to offer a premium. So all you're doing in that case, Victoria, is seeking a premium to move. I mean, it might be clever to say, well, I'm very happy where I am now. I would only move, obviously, for a better deal.
Fabulous, good advice. So Prakash asked when he signed up to the webinar how to impress an interviewer. I know it's quite a big overarching question, but in your experience, James, what would be the best things to do to impress the interviewer?
Do your homework, Prakash. So you can find out so much online these days, but you should know about the person you're going to see, and you can find out a lot about them on LinkedIn and other sites, and you should know about the company that they're working in. So doing your homework, I mean, no one wants to meet someone who hasn't done that much level of due diligence, if you like. So that's important. Then I think, you know, it's an old-fashioned thing, but appearances are important too. And the sort of dress code world now is really complicated. You want to, if you can, get a feel for, you know, is this a formal or informal or very informal workplace or working environment? And I would suggest pitching, you know, when you're going to meet them, pitching your appearance at just slightly more formal than whatever the norm is. So if it's very informal, go as informal rather than, you know, don't pitch up in shorts and flip-flops, because I think that's just showing respect for the process and for the person who's meeting you. So I think how you present yourself, you know, is the first impression that you give. And, you know, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, as they say. So those are two things and, you know, it's an obvious point. Have a look at the book, because if you've been through these questions and you've prepared, you know, how you might respond to them, it makes for a much better conversation. You're going to find out more about them. They're going to find out more about you, and you're going to be better placed at the end of that discussion to decide whether this is a good match or not.
Great. Okay, so we've got another one coming from Shane. Shane says he's had 3 interviews recently where there's been no interest from the employer in breaking the ice and generating a relationship with you. He says they just go straight in with like 8 to 10 competency-based questions, and he doesn't understand why some employers focus too much on you as a piece of paper and not as a person. And he's asking you, why are employers, do you think, still making interviews super daunting?
Well, I feel your pain in this because I know that's the case. I know this happens all over the place. And I was just telling a story the other day about a young woman who came for an interview with us a few years ago. I actually ended up hiring, who'd worked from the age of 16 and paid her way through her A-levels and university through working. And when she came for an interview with us, she'd been rejected by many employers, I think, because they'd gone through a process like the one you just described. And she was an amazing individual who I offered the job to there and then on the spot. And when I did that, she burst into tears because she'd had so many rejections from these rather mechanistic type processes. But when I talked to a group, I told this story, which I haven't had time to do here fully, to a group of entrepreneurs and family business leaders. I asked the group, put your hand up if you would hire this young woman, and they all put their hands up. So there's something going wrong here where, you know, a good interview is a conversation where you learn about each other. And if it's just a list of competency-based questions, there's something going wrong for sure. So it might be that you need to do a bit of a rethink. Are you pitching yourself to the right types of organization or the right types of roles for yourself? It might be that there's another way. And I think there's also a problem with a lot of computerized questions now. It's harder to present yourself as the full person that you are, and that is an issue with technology. And so I think one option you have, and it sounds self-serving, I suppose perhaps it is to find a good recruitment agency to be your partner. You know, if you've got a recruitment consultant on your side, they will steer you to good opportunities. And I would stress that at the moment, it's the best time to look for a job in 50 years, because there are so many jobs out there, and many of them, as I just mentioned, are showing increases in pay that are very marked. So, you know, don't be discouraged. There's masses of opportunities out there, and there'll be people who will want to come alongside you and help you get those jobs, who work in recruitment businesses. So I'm sorry you've had that experience. It's no fun. I wouldn't like it either.
We've had quite a few of the same question, so I'm just going to go take the first one. Gigi asks, how do you answer a question at interview that you only have a little bit of knowledge on or don't know the answer to?
Gigi, well, I find it quite refreshing. I mean, the types of questions that are in this book, you will be able to answer because they're not highly technical questions. But it might be that you're in an interview for a highly technical role and you don't know the answer. And I think it's quite refreshing just to say that. I don't know the answer to that question, but I could go and find out by doing X, Y, or Z. And why that's refreshing is it really underlines your integrity. You're not trying to BS the interviewer. You're saying, I don't actually know that answer right now, but I could find out for you and come back to you. And I would respond as an interviewer very positively to an individual who did that. I mean, there are some questions in this book, you know, like how many ping pong balls can you fit in a 747 in that curveball category? And clearly, no one's expected to know the answer to that, but they're asking you that question to see if you might have a go at answering it. So that's a different type of thing. So if it's a question of that nature, then you need to have a go, and you need to, they're looking for, do you think logically around, well, if so many ping pong balls fit in a box of this size, and you could get so many of those boxes in the aeroplane, that would lead to, you know, 1 million ping pong balls, for instance. So there are some questions that are highly technical because it's a technical job, and you certainly wouldn't want to pretend you know the answer when you don't. And there are others that are simply looking for whether you would have a go, show some initiative to try and solve a problem. So I suppose it's what category does the question fall into of those two, and then approach it accordingly. But yeah, none of us know everything. I mean, why would that be reasonable to expect? I mean, you know, someone asked me a question just the other day in a workshop we were doing here at Reed on as a leadership academy. You know, how do you manage parts of the business where you don't have the technical expertise? And I can tell you right now, there are lots of parts of this business where I don't have the technical expertise. But my answer was to the question was, what's important to me is that there's someone in those areas of the business that I trust, who does have the technical expertise. So trust is so important in business and in all human relationships, I believe, that that is the most important thing to come across from you, that you're trustworthy. So if you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer.
Just say so. Okay, we've got one from Jessica. She says, "Hello, James. Jess, an executive coach in the home counties here. I often advise my restart participants to send a follow-up email when they can. How soon should you send a follow-up email after an interview, and do you advise it?" Basically, she's asking.
Yeah, there's a little section on that at the end of the book. I'm just looking at it, and I think there's no harm in doing that at all. Just to say a short message. Thank you for taking the time to see me. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I feel even more enthusiastic, if that's true, about the opportunity. So there's no harm in doing that, and I think within 24 hours of the interview is a good time to do it. You don't want to wait too long. Having said that, you don't want them to become what we call more described as a stalker. You don't want to keep pursuing the person. I think it's good to show enthusiasm. I don't think we can fault enthusiasm, but you don't want to be obsessive about it. And they will or should get back to you. Unfortunately, they don't always. They should get back to you. And if they don't, it's probably not a runner, is it?
Brilliant. Ajiwa, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, asks, how do you answer the question, why are you applying for this particular post?
Well, that is a personal question, isn't it? I mean, it's the ultimate personal question in a way. What is it about this job that motivates, interests you? And I think a key message in the introduction of this book, and it's really important to stress this, is a job is a problem to be solved. So in your answer to that question, you should be thinking about what you have to bring to that organization, that team, that individual to help solve whatever problem it is that they're looking to solve. It shouldn't be about you wanting to earn more money or move town or do something more challenging. It should be about how you are the solution to the role. So, you will have your own skills and your own preferences and your own desires. And it's important, I think, that you spend time thinking about exactly what sort of jobs you want to do and why. Having done that, you want to present yourself as the solution to the problem they're looking to solve. And I can't stress that enough. I mean, that one piece of thought or thinking or observation transforms how people present themselves at interview. So if you're presenting yourself as the solution to their problem, they'll be way more interested in you than if you're presenting it the other way around.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Okay, we have one from Marianne here. When you have more than 20 years of diverse experience, how do you extract the most salient aspects for the interview?
Marianne, well, that's a good question. I think you should begin by doing it on your CV. I mean, your CV ideally shouldn't be more than 2 pages in length. I mean, it's all online now, isn't it? But if you imagine it being printed out, it shouldn't be more than 2 sides of a piece of A4. I would even urge to do it on 1 side of a piece of A4, and my CV still fits on 1 side of A4, and I've been working for 30 plus years. So the point there is you're distilling the key pieces of information down before you have the conversation. And then I think it's important to answer the question. So if they're asking about, tell me a time when you led a team through a crisis, you should have something in mind about when you did that, if you're a manager, that is. If you've had lots of roles, that's not necessarily a problem. It might look a bit problematic if they're all very short, but if you've had lots of roles because you've been working as a contractor or you've had career breaks, just explain. And I think it's most important for you to be clear about what you want to do next and why, and why you're sitting across the table from the interviewer. So, answer their questions, but you'll answer them way better if you're well prepared when you go in.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Mingyu, she asks, or he asks, I'm not sure, sorry. When the interviewer asks about my strengths, can I think for a second and write notes? For example, list 4 points and then give the answers. Is that the done thing to do?
Well, if you're well prepared, you should have the answer in mind for that question. So that would be a strange thing to do, I think, or it would look like you weren't fully ready for the question, and I'd ask myself if I was watching someone write notes, why not? So, you know, why does that require, you know, you should know about yourself. So I don't think there's any harm in having a notepad. I think it's a good thing to do to maybe make notes of things they tell you about their organization or about the next steps. I think it shows that you're sort of taking on board things, pieces of feedback. And you know, I've got my notebook right here. I carry one all the time, and I take notes, conversations all the time. I don't tend to write down what I'm going to say to someone. I more normally write down what they've said to me. So, you know, or what I've found particularly pertinent in what they've been saying. So I don't know, but if I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable about doing that, if that works for you, do it. I mean, it's important to be true to yourself in this process. And if you find that relaxes you and it gives you a moment, you might say, just can I take a moment? I just want to prioritize or put them in a particular order or something. You know, I've got some things in mind. I just want to write them down so I can think about which one I want to talk to you about. You know, I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to signpost what you're doing a bit.
Brilliant. We've had another really good one through from Victoria. She asks, how would you approach an interview where you're pursuing in like a leadership management role, but you haven't got prior experience of being a leader or manager?
You know, this question about what do you do if you haven't got experience when they're asking for experience is an age-old problem. But I think you might be able to point to experience elsewhere. And when I talk to people about leadership and management, I always say that the leadership and management begins with yourself. I mean, the first person we've all got to learn to lead and manage is ourselves. So, you know, think about that. And then think about, there might be actually, to your surprise, quite a few occasions where you've shown leadership and management. They don't have to be at work. They might be in a social context. They might be in a community context or a charity or voluntary organization, or it might be during your education. So if you do a little self-audit of times that you've actually had to manage resources, people, a problem even, then it's good to just have an example or two that you can share. It doesn't have to be work related necessarily. And I think, you know, also, if you can show that you've been studying leadership and management, that's important too. You know, business is not an amateur activity, it's a profession. And leadership and management is something that we can learn and must learn. And leaders aren't born, I don't believe that. Leaders are made, and a large part of how they're made is because they're open to learning about leadership. So there are lots of great books that, you know, that you could look at and read about leadership. There are great movies you can watch. There are people out there who are exemplars of leadership in the professions, in public life, in sports. You know, you can learn so much from looking at and observing other people that I think that's a rich vein that you can find ways of presenting yourself in an interesting way.
Thank you, James. So last question, I think we've got time for about one more. Kanak asks, how do you respond when an interviewer asks you to tell them why you are the most suitable candidate for the role?
Well, that's a good question to sort of come to at the end. I mean, obviously, you don't know about the other candidates for the role, but so it's an opportunity for you to summarize why you think you're the solution to their particular problem and what you have to bring. And I think why you really want the job or why you think it's right for you. I find it quite compelling when people say, I just would love this job. I think I would thrive here. I think I could contribute a lot and show real enthusiasm. So when you're asked that question, it's not actually about how do you compare with anyone else. It's why should we choose you? Why you, literally? And it's a great opportunity for you to summarize why you want the job and why you're there. And you want to nail those points one at a time. I mean, obviously, each interview is a different conversation. Each person's a different person, and it's important to be true to you. You know, why are you there? And you can make those points in, I think, a very positive and a compelling way. And see that question. That question's an opportunity to hit what they call in baseball a home run. So make the most of it.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. So I think that's about all we've got time for. Thank you so much for taking everyone's questions. I can see people that have sent questions through have said thank you to you on the chat. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Amy.
Great.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you to everyone for joining us. Like James has just said, if you are looking for more kind of interview advice, then please you can scan the QR code on your screen now that will take you directly to James's book, and you can purchase that on Amazon. Also, we have lots of resources on read.com. If you visit our resources page, and there's lots of interview advice and guidance on there. The webinar has been recorded and will be emailed out to you as a bit of follow-up. Please do feel free to share that with people that you feel that might find it useful. And thank you very much to all of you for joining, and have a lovely afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James.
Bye everyone. Thank you.